All right, hey guys, I have someone special to me. I have my mom here today, if you couldn't tell. So thanks, Mom, for coming. And
you're welcome. I was really nervous when you asked me, but okay.
I keep telling her, like, it's just a conversation. Okay, so here's our icebreaker.
Okay. For me, there's just, without going into a lot of detail, there's just a lot of things that are going on. We've had both my parents passed away within a month and a half of each other just this past summer. And in that, there's been additional backlash and all of that with my brothers. But I have one brother who is in desperate need of God's miracle. And God has shown himself in this situation. And my brother actually accepted Christ before going into surgery. But I've got two brothers, my brother Paul, my brother Mark, my brother Paul is taking care of my brother Mark. And I feel completely powerless at what can be done because I know it's going to have to take a miracle. And I know that God's going to do it. I know it. I feel it with every fiber of my being that he's going to do it and he's going to answer. But I'm not a patient person. So I feel like I know that God's going to do it. I just want him to do it in my time rather than his time. And of course, which would mess everything up. But I feel powerless at what I can do. I feel like I need to be doing more to help my brother Paul in helping my brother Mark. And because we don't live in the same, town or state and stuff, I feel very powerless in this situation. What about you?
I think, and it's not so much now, but I did start to kind of like freak out when I first started having kids, being like, I can't save them. Mm-hmm. And so that was kind of a big deal as far as like, but I finally surrendered that, knowing that like, okay, my job is to raise them with a biblical foundation, mm-hmm. and that's as far as I get to go. Mm-hmm. Which, sometimes like at the beginning when I really started noticing that, I was like, oh man, that sucks. They can't be grandfathered into this, or, mm-hmm. But that at some point that they have to make that decision, and they have to, choose that for themselves at some point. And obviously, you've lived that, having 3 girls. My poor mom, we put her through, honestly, hell. But yeah, anyway, so that was kind of the area that I thought the most. I was like, I think that might be the area that I'm just kind of like, it does kind of suck not having the power in that area. Mm-hmm. But then it's like, but if I did, then I would really take away from God's story in their life. Mm-hmm.
Oh, I think for me, the way I answered it is when caring for and being responsible for myself becomes center stage, then the spotlight is on me, versus when I view myself the way I really am and I surrender those faults to God, then I'm being responsible to see myself and understand that I can't fix it. I can't make myself change. Mm-hmm. I know that I have to surrender whatever the issue is. For me, a lot of times it's patience. To surrender that to him and have him build that within me. Then I feel like I'm being responsible by being true in what I see in myself and being able to be willing to surrender that to God and say, okay, I know I've probably surrendered this 20 times, but here it is again. Mm-hmm. And I feel like that is being responsible and seeing myself in how I really am and not allowing pride or anything else to set in and say, yeah, but I do this. I may be impatient, but I do this, mm-hmm. to still see myself the way I truly am. And that is someone that still desperately needs God to come in and fix that area, which I can't do.
Mm-hmm. I think you said a good point as far as like when it starts becoming that we are center stage, that's when we start heading towards that striving, mm-hmm. rather than stewarding
right.
our, what God has given us. Well, and I think for me, I realized I was like, I was in a conversation with my husband saying like, I've worked really hard to not respond to you in anger when we're frustrated. I've worked really hard to come and talk with you using wisdom and grace. When it's like, no. Like I am definitely, cheating God out of being like, okay, no. You have changed my heart. Amen. You have, transformed the way way I react to situations. You have transformed my thought process, my, you know, and how I approach situations. And so for me, I know I can definitely do that, where I can start thinking that like, I am the reason why I'm doing good. And I'll take pride in that and be like, well, I'm the reason why I feel like I have wisdom, or I'm the reason why I changed, or why I'm more patient, or why I'm more graceful. When really it's like, no, God has just done that over the years. As I've, you know, been disciplined and reading God's word and praying, he has developed those things inside of me as I've surrendered them.
And it's so easy to do. We don't even think about how it's coming out. And I think it's just our human nature to just use I.
Yeah, and give ourselves the credit rather than giving God the credit. Right. Yeah.
Or and then maybe in some cases we're saying I and not meaning to take the credit, but yet it comes out that we're taking all the credit. Yeah. I tend to be more of a striving Susie, who's always trying to work towards whatever God is wanting me to do, and whatever He's calling me to do, I'm trying to do that, and desperately trying to be obedient as possible in doing so. But what ends up tripping me up is that I tend to not be patient, and I strive ahead on my own things and on my own stuff, and almost always, well, I shouldn't say almost always, it backfires on me. It starts out, you know, God, I want this, I want to be all that you want me to be, and you know, what are your dreams for me, and like the situation with my parents, I'm like, you know, how are you going to move on this? I truly trust you. And then if you're not moving when I think that you should move, I will forge ahead, and I will think, surely God will bless what I'm doing here, because it's for their good, and I'm going to do this, and it backfires every single time.
Yeah. So if you had to give yourself on a rate of like 1 to 5, passive Patty being a 1, striving Susie being a 5, where would you say you are?
4 3/4. 4 3/4. My husband, actually, I talked to him about this question last night, and he says that for me, a good way to put it for me, and he was very sweet, but he's very sweet anyway. I was asking him, you know, I said, would I be a passive Patty or would I be a striving Susie? He says, definitely you're a striving Susie. He's like, I've never, this is his words, and obviously he's, I think, a little biased, but he says, I've never known you to not be obedient, which of course I have been, but he says, I think and he was very careful as how he said it. He said, I think where you could benefit is to be patiently obedient, strive to be patiently obedient. And I was like, oh, that's good. So that's my new prayer.
I wish I could have just sat in for the conversation to see how Dad approached that with you.
He was talking to me like this.
Like,
patient.
So if you know anything, you don't make this Mexican lady mad. But
it was so true. When
yeah,
he said it, I was like, I loved it. I was like, thank you, honey. I needed that.
Exactly. I mean, that's what we're supposed to do, is spur one another on in Christ. And sometimes somebody needs to tell us, like, hey, you could practice being more patient.
Yeah.
I'm definitely a lot like my mom in a lot of ways, where I am more of just kind of like, I want to strive for success. I take a lot of pride in success or personal successes, which is where that can hinder my growth, or just because like I start to think that like I'm the reason for my change, or I'm the reason why I'm doing well, rather than giving God the credit. And obviously, like, it's much easier to do again when I'm in God's word, but when I'm not, it's very easy to see where I've been, where I am now, and to think, wow, I've done such a great job. And so I think that's me. It would be pride gets in my way, because I can start to think that like I'm somehow in control.
Yeah, me too.
And so what can Patties and Susies learn from each other? It's like,
I had a hard time with
Susies
that.
can't learn anything from Patties.
That's kind of how I always think. I was like,
Patties can learn everything from Susies.
Patties need to get with the program, is what I'm saying.
All right, Patty's out there. You can give us some insight.
Yes, please do.
I mean, there's obviously
Probably we could just chill out a little bit.
Yeah, I
Maybe
think
chill out a little bit.
for example, my husband would probably be more of a passive Patty. Not like he is somebody who works hard and he, is, but sometimes he does need a little bit more spurring on. And I think probably the majority of our husbands at times may need that big, but last night I'm like going through these questions and I am just like loving the discussion. And like we take a break because it's like, okay, we should go upstairs, we should go to bed. And I'm like, oh, what are you doing? And he's like doing something else. And I'm like, oh, I have a couple more questions. And he was like, babe, just you need to just stop for a second. He's like, I love the conversation, but sometimes I don't want to go so in depth with you all the time. So learning from somebody who's a little bit more passive would be probably just to let things sit for a while.
Yeah.
That's what I think. So yeah, that might be mine. Where I can sometimes get too excited with things, or just because I am more of just being like, go, like strive to do this and do this, and I'm one of those people who can put more on their plate than I should. And so
I don't know where you got that.
yeah, and so I think that's probably learning from somebody who is a little bit more passive, being like, okay, hey, be, like you said, be patient. Take a little bit of time to let things sit in for a little bit, rather than just like overwhelm yourself with all the things you think you need to get done. All right, so we learned something from you, Patty's.
Thank you, Patty. This one was hard. I won't lie. This was hard for me to answer. And as I was answering, I wasn't sure if I was answering it correctly. I'm very much relational oriented. So what immediately comes to my mind is, the most important gift. As I'm thinking of gifts, I'm reading it as it says, being good stewards of God's gifts. Okay, so the gifts that I feel like He has given me is the gift of salvation. Am I being a good steward with that? Am I living the way I'm supposed to be? Being a godly servant, God's given me the gift of marriage. Am I being a godly wife, godly mother? Children are a gift from God. So and then it goes on to grandmother, daughter, sibling, teacher, friend. And on the me side, I'm thinking, I have control over how much effort I put into being a godly servant, a godly wife, a godly mother. And those are things that God has given me to steward well. These are all gifts, and I don't want to ever take them for granted. Have I? Absolutely, because I'm human. But those are things that I know that I'm trying to do the best that I can to be a good steward of what He gave me. But then, like Mariah and I were talking before this, as far as just being a mother, I mean, my husband and I's job was to raise our girls in a godly home. Did we make mistakes? Absolutely, countless mistakes. But God's grace, praise the Lord, is so sufficient. But I have no control over whether they were going to get saved, whether they were going to choose Jesus. Of course, when they were little, we were so excited. They'd come home and they'd say, I accepted Jesus, whether it was at church or at our house or whatever, and that was awesome. But it was when we'd start seeing it happen in their lives and they made Jesus their very own. That is totally God.
Yeah.
That's totally God. Does it have anything to do with us rearing them the way they did? Absolutely. That was the foundation. That was what God said. This is what I'm giving you as responsibility to do. Now you do it well so that I can do my work and do this, And not that, even if we didn't do a good job, God still could make sure that they got saved. I mean, look at my background. I didn't have that, but God had a calling there. So anyway.
As far as, are there any items on the God side of the paper for which you have been taking responsibility? Specifically my mom and I actually had a conversation. I went through just a time of just rebellion, unfortunately. That was a time in my life, and I remember my mom was aware of it, and it was obviously very difficult to watch me go through that. I know that caused a lot of problems between my parents, of just like, it's like, because their daughter is willfully sinning, and then you start thinking, where did we go wrong? And then the enemy just puts those lies, and it's your fault. No, it's his fault. It's and so I know that caused spiritual warfare on our family when I went through that. But I remember even like I had a conversation with my mom, and, you know, despite the lifestyle I was choosing to live, she still loved me regardless. Even if it did cause fights, we got frustrated with each other. But I remember there was a point where I'm sure you're probably trying to save me, which I think would be extremely hard for any parent not to try to do. And I remember, do you remember what I told you?
I do.
And I said, Mom, you got to find God the way you found him. Let me find him the way I need to find him. But that would be really hard for me to not try to save them, and not try to keep their salvation for them or to make them saved.
And honestly, I have to say that conversation that Mariah had with me, that we had together, she and I went to a different level. And she brought me to a different level in my mothering, in that she let me know, Mom, you got to back off. You got to back off, and you got to let me make my mistakes, and you got to let God show me. And then after we had that conversation, I remember going to my room and just crying. And I cried out to God, and I said, you're right. She's right, Lord. I did find you the way the plan that you had for me, and how I had to find you. And I'm like, Lord, I keep trying to be what's going to cause her to turn around. I keep hoping that something I say is going to make her change her mind. When, you know, and here this whole time I was giving my husband a hard time, telling him that he needed to stop being her safety net. Let her fall. Let her make the mistakes that she needs to make. Let her feel that, when I was doing the exact same thing in a different form. But I remember her saying that, and that helped me to see. And God said, you say you surrender her to me, yet you still keep trying to save her. He's like, so, you know, let her go and watch me work. Hopefully she remembers I did back off.
Yeah, no, she did for sure. And, you know, and thankfully, like I said, I did have a rebellious time, but thankfully it was very short-lived compared to the, you know, long life that, I pray I have. But
it was bathed in prayer.
Yeah.
It truly was. It was bathed in prayer.
Again, yeah, for sure. That's why we should be praying for our kids. I know I've specifically done this health. So if you guys can hear giggling, all the kids just woke up from their nap time.
Yeah.
And so, so my husband was diagnosed. I'll make this very brief. But he was diagnosed with type 1 diabetes just a couple years after we were married. If you know anything about type 1 diabetes, it is different than type 2. Which is where, you know, your older people have type 2, and it's usually due to like eating habits. Type 1 is just your pancreas just turns on you, your body just turns on you and destroys your pancreas. And so you were now to the point where like you have to have insulin for anything you have, drinks, snacks, food, you know, whatever. So it caused a lot of issues. And then again, if you know anything about diabetes, it causes if it's not taken care of well, it just causes a number of health issues later on, because it is an autoimmune disease. And so that was a point in my life. I had already made things right with God, but it really just took me back to like, oh my goodness, am I really going to keep this faith? And is everything that the Bible and everything that everyone's telling me, is it true? Is it accurate? Like, do I actually believe it? Because there was a long time where I just felt like I felt numb to what everyone was saying, and I just felt like everyone just needed to honestly shut up.
Leave me alone.
Yeah, because it was just like, I didn't want to hear all things of, you know, like, and, you know, I think anybody who goes through some sort of very life-changing moments like this, that's when we do begin to own our faith more. And you know, that's when you do decide, am I really going to cling to this? Do I actually believe it's true? But long story short, there was just a lot of times where I was trying to control my husband's health. And, you know, rather than stewarding, you know, his diet well, just like making healthy choices, you know, making sure we're counting things correctly, that we're being mindful of, you know, highs and lows in his blood sugar, you know, just doing what we're supposed to do. I had gotten to the point where it was just like, I was going to control every aspect of it, to where the point I was driving him crazy. And he was driving himself crazy because he was doing the same thing, where it was like we were trying to just control so much of it. And I remember there was a specific night, and there's been multiple times where I've had to do this. where I felt like I actually had to like release my husband's health. Although I had no control over it, I felt like I did, and I was trying to, and it was God saying like, this is my area. You have no control over his health, and you're gonna have to surrender that because this is my job. Like his life, you know, his health, I'm the one who will control it. And you know, it's like, obviously we steward it by making good decisions with his diet, with his health, but ultimately we're not in charge of that.
Right. And honestly, like she says, we're not in control. It's actually giving up and surrendering our need to feel like we're in control.
Okay, we had to have one join us. She's like smiling. All the kids woke him up, and they went into his room because they thought when they woke up from their nap, he needed to as well. So he's not going to be happy if mommy puts him down right now. Specifically for me, I know currently my husband and I were trying to pay off debt, and I can very much just be like, but I have this plan in my head on how we're going to get this done, and it's going to work, and it's perfect, and you know, but then of course these things happen and life happens, and I'm like, dang it, we're not able to put as much money towards debt as we were hoping, or where, you know, this came up, or that, you know, just all these different things where it's like, I'm sure God is just trying to show me like, hey, I'm the one in control. I'm the one that's going to help you get this taken care of, and I will provide the means. You just need to steward the money that you have well. And so for me, that's my current one where I know God is speaking to me, telling me, like, I even said it one time to my dad, and I was like, oh, but it just ruins my plan to get us out of debt. And my dad was like, oh, that's funny, like your plan. He even texted me back, and he was like, he said something, he's like, make sure it's not your plan, make sure it's God's plan. Okay guys, well that concludes chapter 5. I'm super excited to just really dig into the more of the actual like worldviews that we're seeing in our world today, and just where we may be believing those, or where we can discern and see those better. So anyway, I'm excited to hear from the rest of you guys, and we will see you guys next time. Bye.
Bye.